They were the picture of happiness everyone envied. The young man and the millionaire's daughter seemed like a couple straight out of a modern-day fairy tale. Together, they graced the brightly lit halls of the most exclusive events, exchanging smiles that had the power to silence the room around them. On starry nights, they shared intimate conversations over elegant dinners, while the city lights sparkled in the background, like silent accomplices to their romance. He looked at her with an intensity that seemed to promise the world, and she returned it with unshakable confidence. At art galleries and charity events, he made her laugh with his sharp observations and irresistible charm. She, in turn, seemed transformed in his presence, as if she had finally found someone who truly understood her world. Their bond was evident to anyone watching, whether in subtle gestures like a touch on the hand or grand displays like an impromptu dance in an almost empty ballroom. To everyone who saw them, they were the perfect couple. And yet, behind all that apparent perfection, there were subtle signs that things might not be as solid as they seemed. The young man, with his enchanting smile, sometimes had a distant look in his eyes, as if he were hiding secrets no one could guess. The millionaire's daughter, blinded by passion, didn't notice. Her world revolved around him, and she was willing to defend him against any doubt that arose, even if it came from her own heart. The millionaire himself was a man who carried the weight of his success in every step, the kind of figure who commanded respect with his mere presence. His life was marked by sacrifices and strategic choices, and he knew that nothing in the business world happened by chance. He loved his daughter with an almost exaggerated zeal, as though every step she took needed the protection of his shadow. But lately, the instincts that had guided him so well in the corporate world whispered something unsettling. There was something about the young man he couldn't figure out. Perhaps it was that he seemed too perfect to be true. The relationship between father and daughter was marked by long conversations, almost always at the breakfast table, when he could momentarily set aside the corporate world. "You mean everything to me," he often said, his words full of sincerity. She would smile, slightly embarrassed, but she knew he meant it. Still, a quiet unease now lingered in his thoughts, one he couldn't put into words without risking pushing her away. Was he being paranoid, or was the young man truly hiding something? The millionaire wasn't a man of impulsive actions. He observed, analyzed. His watchful eyes tracked the young man's every move when he was in their home, scrutinizing his gestures, his words, even his silences. Even during the most trivial conversations, he searched for clues, anything to validate his intuition. It was a silent battle between the protective father and the meticulous businessman, and at that moment, both were equally perplexed. But one thing he knew, where there's smoke, there's always fire. The daughter's childhood friend was one of those rare companions whose loyalty could never be questioned. They had grown up side by side, sharing not just toys, but also the dreams and confidences of youth. He was the kind of person who preferred action to words, always ready to help without expecting anything in return. And though he had never said it out loud, he held a special affection for her, something that may have grown beyond friendship. But when she introduced her new boyfriend, he fell silent, as if resigning himself to a fate he could no longer change. From the beginning, he sensed something was off about the young man. It wasn't anything tangible, maybe the way he averted his eyes when questioned, or how calculated his answers to even the simplest questions seemed. The friend observed quietly, but with heightened awareness. When he tried to voice his concerns to her, she reacted with irritation, as if he had crossed an unspoken boundary. "You're being paranoid," she said, frowning. He tried to press the issue, but he saw that, for now, he couldn't break through the wall of trust she had built around her boyfriend. Still, the friend didn't give up. In moments of solitude, he reflected on how deeply she trusted the young man, and it unsettled him. He felt torn between his loyalty to her and the growing feeling that he needed to protect her, even against her will. From a distance, he watched the couple, mentally noting details that didn't add up. He knew that if his instincts were correct, it was only a matter of time before the young man's facade began to crack. As the days passed, his unease grew. During a dinner at the Millionaire's house, he noticed that the young man seemed uncomfortable with certain questions the host asked. The friend paid close attention, noting every expression and silence. It was as if the young man was always one step ahead, carefully crafting a perfect image. But too much perfection was always suspicious, and the friend knew that sooner or later, something would slip. He decided he couldn't wait. If no one else was willing to see what he saw, he would take matters into his own hands. He began investigating quietly, so as not to alarm anyone, especially the millionaire's daughter. It wouldn't be easy, and he knew that. But above all, he knew he couldn't fail. Not when she might be in danger she didn't even realize existed. Beneath the facade of the perfect boyfriend, the young man concealed a darker side. The instincts of the millionaire and his daughter's friend were spot on. The young man was careful, almost obsessively meticulous, when arranging his clandestine meetings with the executive of the millionaire's rival company. He chose discreet locations, out-of-the-way cafes, empty parking lots, or even private rooms in exclusive clubs. During these meetings, his demeanor shifted. The calm, charismatic tone was replaced by calculated coldness, and the warmth in his eyes turned to a sharp, assessing gaze. These encounters revolved around numbers, strategies, and confidential information. The young man disclosed invaluable details gleaned from the millionaire's daughter, always masking his betrayal with clever justifications. He believed he was playing on a chessboard where only he could see the moves. The rival executive encouraged him, promising generous rewards if he could dig even deeper. To the young man, this wasn't just a game. It was his opportunity to climb the ladder, no matter the cost. However, there were moments when he felt the tension of being watched. During one such meeting, in the dimly lit corner of a restaurant, he had the unsettling sense that someone's eyes were on him. He feigned checking his phone while subtly scanning the room. Though he didn't see anyone, his mind began to race. Was the millionaire onto him? Or was it just paranoia? He resolved to be even more cautious, avoiding any actions that might draw attention. Despite his vigilance, his actions were beginning to leave traces. One evening, he left the house claiming he had an urgent matter to attend to. The millionaire's daughter, trusting as always, accepted his excuse without question. But her childhood friend noticed the inconsistency. Watching from afar, he tailed the young man to a commercial building, where he saw him enter through a side door. It was a clue, and the friend knew it was just the beginning. Something big was unfolding, and he was determined to uncover it. Each meeting the young man attended was another piece of a dark puzzle. He thought he was in control, but the web of lies he wove was becoming increasingly difficult to manage. The trust he inspired was beginning to show cracks, and without realizing it, he was inching closer to an inevitable downfall. But for him, the risk was worth it. After all, he had always believed that to win, one had to dare, even if it meant betraying those who trusted him most. It was a quiet night at the mansion, but the atmosphere among its residents felt heavy. The childhood friend, determined to act, seized an opportunity when the millionaire was alone in his office, immersed in financial documents. He hesitated at the door for a moment, but gathered his courage and knocked. "Sir," he began, stepping inside cautiously. "May I speak to you about something important?" The millionaire looked up, surprised by the interruption, but gestured for him to enter. "Of course, have a seat," he said, setting the papers aside. The friend took a deep breath before starting. "I don't know how to say this, but I think there's something strange about the guy your daughter is seeing." He knew his words might not be well received, but his concern outweighed his fear. The millionaire frowned slightly at first. "Are you insinuating something about her boyfriend?" he asked in a neutral tone, though clearly alert. The young man explained what he had observed, recounting moments when the boyfriend seemed to be hiding something or acting too calculated. The millionaire remained silent for a moment, processing the information. "And you're absolutely certain about this? It's not just jealousy or some old rivalry between the two of you?" The question was direct, and the friend felt the weight of responsibility. "It's not jealousy," he said firmly. "I want what's best for her, I always have. But this guy, something about him doesn't sit right. The things he says or does, they just don't feel genuine." His sincerity seemed to strike a chord with the millionaire, who leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the young man. "Very well," he said at last. "Tell me exactly what you've seen." The millionaire listened closely, not interrupting. When the friend finished, he stood and walked to the window, staring out at the vastness of his estate. "If you're right, he's not just deceiving my daughter, he's deceiving me too," he murmured, more to himself than to the other. He knew the young man was justified in bringing these concerns forward, but he also understood that acting too quickly could cause greater harm. Still, the thought of someone manipulating his family filled him with indignation. Already formulating a plan, the millionaire decided he needed more evidence before taking action. He thanked the friend for his courage in coming forward and asked him to stay vigilant. "You did the right thing by coming to me," he said, placing a firm hand on the young man's shoulder. "But from here on out, we need proof, not just suspicions." This conversation marked the beginning of a cautious but determined alliance between them. The first steps were carefully planned. The millionaire leveraged his vast network of contacts to begin discreetly investigating the young man's past. Meanwhile, the friend took on a more active role, closely observing the boyfriend's behavior at home and during social events. Though they approached the situation from different angles, they shared the same goal: uncovering the truth before it was too late. In the days that followed, their efforts began to yield results. The millionaire received preliminary reports that pointed to inconsistencies in the young man's background. Meanwhile, the friend, tailing him on a suspicious night, watched as he entered a commercial building without offering any explanation to the millionaire's daughter. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but the picture was far from complete. As they moved forward on this dangerous path, both men knew that time was their greatest enemy. While the millionaire relied on his network and the work of a private investigator, his daughter's friend felt compelled to do more. He knew the young man was clever and cautious, but he also believed that no one could maintain a facade indefinitely. Determined to protect the young woman he had always considered a sister, he began taking matters into his own hands. It was a huge risk, but being close to the boyfriend gave him a better chance of uncovering the truth. He observed every movement, every excuse, and every late-night outing, piecing together a mental map of what might be happening. One particularly quiet night, the young man left the house, claiming he was meeting a friend. The daughter's friend saw his chance and discreetly followed the car through the city streets. The glow of streetlights reflected off the rearview mirrors as he kept a safe distance. The destination was a secluded commercial building where the boyfriend entered through a side door. The friend waited patiently, watching as lights flickered on in a third-floor room. It was clear this wasn't a casual visit, and he resolved to return another time to learn more. Another night brought a moment of tension. He followed the young man to a deserted parking lot, where he spotted him speaking with a man in a black car with tinted windows. As he tried to get closer, he stepped wrong and kicked a small stone, the sound echoing through the stillness. The young man immediately stopped talking, his gaze darting around like that of a predator sensing danger. The friend quickly ducked behind a column, barely breathing as he waited for the threat to pass. Thankfully, the young man didn't spot him and resumed the conversation, but the scare was a stark reminder to be more cautious. As the days passed, the friend felt like an amateur detective. He used his phone to snap photos of suspicious meetings and jotted down every detail in a small notebook he kept in his pocket. During one of these investigations, he captured what he believed to be a crucial image: the young man shaking hands with a man he recognized as an executive from a rival company of the millionaire. He knew this connection couldn't be a coincidence and that something much bigger was at play. However, he also realized a single photo wouldn't be enough to convince anyone. The moral dilemma began to weigh on him. How far should he go to protect the millionaire's daughter? Every step he took seemed to bring him closer to a dangerous edge, but he knew turning back wasn't an option. Each new discovery added a piece to a larger puzzle, but he still needed the final pieces to complete the picture. Time was running out, and the burden of responsibility was overwhelming, but his resolve had never been stronger. The young woman trusted the boyfriend blindly, and the friend knew that if he failed, the consequences could be devastating, not just for her, but for the entire family. The boyfriend, though skilled in manipulation, began to sense that he was being watched. Small, almost imperceptible signs unsettled him. Cars lingering too long in parking spots, glances that seemed to follow him at events, even the fleeting reflection of movement in the window of a cafe where he held a meeting. These subtle cues forced him to take more cautious measures. He adjusted his routine, altered the timing of his meetings, and stopped frequenting certain locations. Despite these precautions, his unease grew. Something was amiss, and he needed to act. The tension pushed him toward a bold decision. It was time to formalize his relationship with the millionaire's daughter. An engagement would be the perfect move to solidify his position within the family while creating a smokescreen to deflect suspicion. He chose the occasion carefully, planning an elaborate proposal in the mansion's garden under the soft glow of a starlit sky. Kneeling before her with a diamond ring that sparkled as brightly as her eyes, he declared, "I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I want to spend the rest of my days by your side." The millionaire's daughter was momentarily stunned, but quickly broke into pure joy. "Yes, of course, yes," she exclaimed, throwing herself into his arms as the household staff discreetly watched the scene unfold from a distance. For her, this was the perfect fairy tale moment, the natural step in a relationship she believed to be grounded in genuine love. For him, it was a calculated move. With the engagement official, he had a shield against any doubts or accusations. After all, who would question someone about to become an official member of the family? When the news broke, reactions varied. The millionaire's daughter was elated, sharing every detail with friends and relatives. The young man seized the opportunity to further cement his image as the ideal partner, behaving flawlessly in front of everyone. Yet the looks from the millionaire and his daughter's friend unsettled him deeply. Her father, though polite, seemed distant, weighing every word as he offered congratulations. The friend barely hid his suspicion, pressing his lips tightly when he heard the announcement. What should have been the young man's ultimate victory came with new challenges. While he had completely deceived the millionaire's daughter, he knew her father and her friend were not convinced. Worse, the friend seemed to linger close by, like a shadow, always watching, waiting for the right moment to act. The young man began doubting every gesture, every smile, and even the silences. He knew the game was becoming more dangerous, and that, to protect himself, he would need to not only strengthen the daughter's unwavering trust, but also find a way to neutralize any threats to his position. After the engagement announcement, the millionaire and his daughter's friend knew they couldn't waste any more time. They met in the millionaire's office, a space that exuded power with its rich wood-paneled walls and shelves lined with books on business and strategy. "We need to act now before he cements his position further," the millionaire said, leafing through the investigator's reports. The friend nodded, his expression resolute. "But we can't risk pushing her away. She's completely blinded by him." The millionaire knew his friend was right. Every attempt to speak against the young man had been met with resistance from his daughter, who firmly believed in the young man's love. "If we're too direct, she'll turn against us. We need irrefutable proof," he said, his tone firm but laced with concern. They began crafting a more careful plan, one that involved continuing the investigator's work and leveraging the friend's discreet surveillance. The goal was to gather undeniable evidence to expose the young man once and for all. The friend, who had already been following the young man on his own, committed to intensifying his efforts. "I can get more photos, maybe even recordings," he suggested. The millionaire, however, warned of the dangers. "We can't let him realize he's being watched. If he knows, he might take an even riskier step." Their discussion stretched for hours, as they examined every detail and every possibility. There was too much at stake: the daughter's safety, the family's integrity, and even the future of the millionaire's business empire. As part of the strategy, the millionaire decided to adopt a more subtle approach toward the young man. He began observing him closely at family gatherings, asking seemingly casual questions, always probing for inconsistencies in his answers. Meanwhile, the friend continued tracking the young man's movements outside the mansion, noting any detail that might prove useful. Though their methods differed, their shared objective kept them united. The tension between them was palpable, but they both understood that patience was critical. "This is a chess game, and he thinks he's the only player," the millionaire remarked with a faint smile. The friend agreed. "He may be clever, but we have something he doesn't: the truth." With that conviction, they pressed forward with their plan, confident that when the right moment came, they would have every card in hand to expose him, so thoroughly that neither the young man nor the millionaire's daughter would be able to deny the reality. The private investigator hired by the millionaire was making significant progress. His discreet and meticulous work began to yield results that exceeded expectations. Detailed reports landed on the millionaire's desk, and each page seemed to paint an increasingly damning picture of the young man. Among the most alarming discoveries were encrypted messages exchanged with the executive of the rival company and bank records indicating regular payments from a source directly tied to the competitor. These findings drew a direct line between the young man and a suspected espionage scheme. Meanwhile, the daughter's friend, working independently, managed to capture a critical video. He followed the young man to a meeting in a parking lot, where he observed him speaking with a man clearly trying to remain inconspicuous. From his hidden vantage point, the friend recorded part of the conversation, catching snippets of references to internal details and sensitive information. Though the audio wasn't perfect, it was enough to link the young man to something significant and dangerous. When he showed the video to the millionaire, the man's expression shifted. "This confirms what I feared," he said, his voice a mix of frustration and relief. At the same time, the investigator delved deeper into the young man's financial transactions. A more detailed analysis revealed that he had been receiving funds from an offshore account linked to a subsidiary of the rival company. This discovery escalated the situation to an entirely new level. It wasn't just about emotional manipulation or familial deception. The young man was actively sabotaging the family while building a direct bridge to the competition. "He's not just betraying us," the millionaire told the friend. "He's trying to destroy us." The millionaire and the friend began organizing the evidence into a clear timeline. They wanted to ensure nothing was left to chance. Photos, bank records, messages, and the friend's video were all compiled into an irrefutable case. Yet one question loomed over their efforts. How would they present all this to the daughter? She was so deeply enamored with the young man that any direct accusation could easily be dismissed as a desperate attempt to break them apart. It was a delicate dilemma, requiring surgical precision. As they planned their next steps, the investigator uncovered another startling revelation. During his research, he found records connecting the young man to a suspicious incident in his past. Before meeting the millionaire's daughter, he had courted another woman from a wealthy family. But the relationship ended abruptly after critical information from her family's business was leaked to a competitor. This pattern of behavior was more than enough to justify a direct confrontation, but the millionaire hesitated. "We need to be absolutely certain," he kept repeating. The following days were tense. The millionaire, a man known for his swift and calculated decisions, found himself navigating an emotional whirlwind. His intuition told him they were on the right track, but he knew the weight of the evidence had to be overwhelming to shatter his daughter's trust in the young man. The friend, however, grew impatient. "We can't wait much longer. Every day that passes, he's closer to getting what he wants," he urged. But the millionaire understood that a rash move could jeopardize their entire plan. Finally, the investigator uncovered the missing piece of the puzzle, a recording of a conversation between the young man and the rival company's executive. In the call, the young man confirmed the transfer of confidential information and discussed plans to gain further access through his proximity to the millionaire's daughter. It was the most damning evidence they could have hoped for. Listening to the recording, the millionaire and the friend exchanged a knowing glance. They both realized the time to act had arrived. With all the evidence in hand, the millionaire began plotting the final move. He knew confronting the young man directly wouldn't be enough. He needed a setting where the young man couldn't escape, where the evidence would speak louder than any denial. "We'll expose him publicly," the millionaire decided. The friend agreed, recognizing the opportunity to not only protect the daughter, but also to permanently unmask the imposter. The plan was set, but its execution would require precision and courage. As the final details were arranged, the millionaire reflected on how much the situation had shifted his perspective. This was no longer just about protecting his daughter or his business. It was about preserving the values and integrity he had built over a lifetime. With a mix of determination and sorrow, he turned to the friend and said, "We're ready." The stage was set, and the story's conclusion approached with an inevitable force. With the evidence meticulously organized, the friend decided he could wait no longer. If there was any chance of saving the millionaire's daughter before things spiraled out of control, he needed to confront her directly. He chose a moment when the young man wasn't around, meeting her in the garden of the mansion on a sunny afternoon. "I need to talk to you about something very important," he began, his serious tone immediately catching her attention. She looked at him with curiosity, but there was a hint of irritation in her eyes. "If this is about him, I already know what you're going to say," she replied, crossing her arms. Ignoring her resistance, the friend began laying out the evidence. He showed her the photos, the video from the parking lot, and the financial details linking the young man to the executive of the rival company. His voice trembled slightly, not from doubt, but from frustration at the thought that the truth might be dismissed. "He's not who you think he is," he said, his urgency almost desperate. But the millionaire's daughter grew more closed off with each word, shaking her head in denial as he spoke. "This doesn't prove anything," she retorted, her voice tinged with emotion. "You're just doing this because you've never liked him." The friend pressed on, revealing more details and explaining the significance of each piece of evidence. "Do you really think all of this is just a coincidence? He's manipulating you to get to your father and everything your family has built." But the more he spoke, the more she pulled away, physically and emotionally. "Enough," she finally said, her voice cracking as tears began to well in her eyes. "You don't understand. He loves me and I love him. And you can't destroy that with your accusations." Her pain was evident, but the friend knew he couldn't give up so easily. He tried a different approach, appealing to the trust they had always shared. "I've never lied to you. I've only ever wanted what's best for you," he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "Please, take a step back and look at this calmly. Think carefully before making a decision you can't undo." But her emotional defenses seemed impenetrable. "I thought you were my friend," she said before turning and walking away, leaving the friend standing alone in the garden, the evidence still clutched in his hands. Defeated, he returned to the millionaire's office to report what had happened. "She doesn't believe me," he said, tossing the photos onto the desk in frustration. The millionaire sighed deeply, having anticipated this outcome. "I told you it would be difficult," he said, trying to maintain his composure. "But we can't give up. If she won't listen, we'll let the truth speak for itself. The next step will be decisive." Though shaken, the friend knew the millionaire was right. There was still hope and they needed to use it. The young man could sense that something was changing. Though he still held the trust of the millionaire's daughter, the father's and friends' watchful eyes were becoming increasingly oppressive. Conversations that once felt casual now carried the weight of subtle interrogations, and family gatherings had turned into minefields of suspicion and uncomfortable silences. It was clear someone knew more than they should. Determined to regain control, the young man began taking more aggressive measures, seeking to isolate the millionaire's daughter from external influences. He crafted scenarios to erode her trust in both her father and her friend. "I feel like they don't like me," he would say, with a melancholy tone that tugged at her heart. "And it hurts because all I want is to be a part of your family." Each word was carefully chosen to paint himself as the victim of an injustice, subtly casting her father and friend as obstacles to their happiness. The pressure drove him to tighten his hold on her. He started suggesting they move the wedding date forward, insisting it would solve many of their problems. "If we're together, no one can tear us apart," he said, holding her hands with a vulnerability that completely disarmed her. Moved, she began to consider the idea. To her, it seemed like the natural next step in their relationship. The young man knew that the sooner their bond was formalized, the harder it would be for the millionaire or her friend to intervene. Meanwhile, his paranoia deepened. The young man began to suspect everyone around him, especially the daughter's friend, who always seemed to be nearby, watching. Every interaction between them was thick with tension. "Do you have something against me?" he asked during one encounter, his forced smile betraying his unease. The friend met his gaze firmly and replied, "I only want what's best for her." The words reverberated in the young man's mind, carrying a clear subtext. His time was running out. He needed to act before it was too late. The psychological strain was becoming unbearable. Unbeknownst to him, the evidence against him was mounting and drawing closer to exposure. Yet for the young man, the greatest challenge was maintaining his facade under increasing pressure. He knew the clock was ticking, and to escape unscathed, he would have to take a bold, perhaps reckless, step. In his mind, it was all or nothing, and he was ready to risk everything. The millionaire knew he couldn't wait any longer. He decided to host a grand social event, ostensibly to celebrate his daughter's engagement, but secretly designed to lure the young man into a carefully orchestrated trap. The mansion was transformed for the occasion, with gardens illuminated by delicate lights and tables impeccably set for an elegant evening. The guest list included strategic allies, close friends, and key figures from the business world. But behind the scenes, the event had a far more serious purpose: to publicly expose the young man. On the night of the event, the millionaire played his role flawlessly. He greeted guests with a warm smile, but his mind was laser-focused on the plan. At the center of attention, the young man appeared at ease, basking in his newfound status as the fiancé of the host's daughter. However, the millionaire knew that the young man's confidence would be his downfall. Using the gathering to his advantage, he subtly guided conversations around the young man, introducing topics that might corner him into making a mistake. Every response was scrutinized, every expression carefully observed. The pivotal moment arrived when the millionaire took the floor to make a formal announcement. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight to celebrate my daughter's love," he began, his voice tinged with emotion. But then his tone shifted. "I also want to take this opportunity to share something important, something that concerns the safety of my family and everything I have worked to build." A hush fell over the crowd as the millionaire turned to look directly at the young man. "Tonight, I will reveal truths that many may not have anticipated." A large screen lit up, and the evidence they had gathered was displayed for all to see. Photographs, suspicious bank transactions, and even the incriminating recording from the investigator appeared one after another, each piece of evidence painting a darker picture of the young man's involvement with the rival company. The room buzzed with murmurs as the young man stood frozen, his face draining of color. He attempted to defend himself, raising his voice in desperation. "This is a setup. None of this is true," he shouted, but his tone betrayed panic rather than outrage. The millionaire, calm and commanding, responded with precision. "If it isn't true, then explain these meetings, these payments, and your connection to our competitors." The young man faltered, unable to provide an answer. His carefully constructed mask cracked under the weight of the evidence. The millionaire's daughter, standing nearby, seemed paralyzed, torn between disbelief and heartbreak. Her gaze shifted from her father to her fiancé, struggling to process the betrayal unfolding before her eyes. The plan had worked, the young man was exposed, and the truth was undeniable. With all the evidence laid bare and an awkward silence gripping the room, the young man made a last-ditch effort to regain control. "You don't understand," he exclaimed, his voice trembling as his eyes darted around the room, searching for support among the guests. "This is all a setup. Someone is trying to frame me because they can't stand that I love his daughter." His tone of victimhood was dramatic, and to some of the guests who didn't know the full story, it almost sounded convincing. Manipulating emotions had always been his skill, and now it was his final weapon. The millionaire's daughter, still frozen in shock, finally found her voice. "Is it true? Tell me the truth," she cried, her tone a mixture of pain and confusion. The young man moved toward her, grasping her hands with theatrical intensity. "I would never do anything to hurt you," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "They're trying to tear us apart because they know we're strong together." For a brief moment, she seemed to waver, her love battling the mounting evidence. But the millionaire stepped in decisively. "Stop manipulating my daughter. The evidence is here, and everyone can see the truth." His voice cut through the tension like a blade, bringing the attention back to the overwhelming proof displayed on the screen. The murmurs among the guests grew louder. Some shifted uncomfortably, while others now openly regarded the young man with suspicion. One woman in the crowd broke the silence. "If you're innocent, then why are these transfers in your name?" she asked, pointing toward the screen. Others followed suit, questioning the secret meetings and the documented ties to the rival company. Each question hit like a blow, further unraveling his carefully constructed facade. Cornered, the young man played his last card. "Those transfers aren't mine. I was set up. That executive, he promised me a partnership, but I never actually agreed to anything. Someone is forging these things to incriminate me." His explanation was desperate, hastily cobbled together, and lacked the polish of his earlier deceptions. The millionaire, however, remained calm and resolute. "You can claim whatever you want, but the evidence speaks louder. And if you were used, you'll have to prove that in court." The millionaire's daughter, now crying openly, pulled away from the young man as he continued his protests. "You have to believe me," he pleaded, his voice growing increasingly hollow. But it was clear to everyone in the room that the game was over. Realizing he had lost the crowd's support, the young man turned abruptly, attempting to leave the event in haste. But the millionaire had planned for this. Security personnel, discreetly stationed throughout the event, stepped forward and blocked his exit. The young man froze, his desperate escape thwarted. He was trapped, his mask irreparably shattered, and there was no place left to hide. After the chaos of the event, the millionaire's daughter retreated to her room, shutting herself off from everyone. It felt as though the ground had been ripped from beneath her. Everything she believed about her relationship now seemed like a lie. Her friend, still concerned, was the first to approach. He knocked softly on the door before stepping inside. "I know this is hard, but you need to hear the truth," he said, his voice low but steady. She didn't respond immediately, but she didn't ask him to leave, which he took as a sign to continue. The millionaire entered shortly after, carrying a folder with the organized evidence. He sat beside his daughter, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Sweetheart, I didn't want you to find out this way, but everything I've done has been to protect you," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. He opened the folder and began showing her the evidence, explaining each piece with patience. Photographs, bank records, suspicious transactions, and even the recording of the young man's conversation with a rival executive were laid out, forming an undeniable picture of betrayal. At first, she resisted looking at the documents. Her hands trembled as she held them, as though touching the evidence meant acknowledging the truth. But as the pieces came together, she began to connect the dots. "He used every moment with me," she murmured, almost to herself, as tears streamed down her face. The friend, sitting across from her, offered quiet support. "This isn't your fault. He's a manipulator. And you wanted to believe he was genuine?" As she absorbed the extent of the deception, memories began to resurface. Small moments that once seemed insignificant now took on new meaning. The late-night phone calls, flimsy excuses, furtive glances. She felt a whirlwind of anger, shame, and grief. "How could I have been so blind?" she asked, looking to her father and her friend. The millionaire gently held her shoulders and replied, "Because you trusted him. And that's not a mistake." The mistake was his. To drive the point home, her friend played the recording he had captured in the parking lot. "Listen to this," he said, playing the audio on his phone. The young man's voice, once sweet and full of affection, now sounded cold and calculating as he discussed sensitive details with the rival executive. Each word hit like a blow, but she listened until the end. When the audio stopped, there was no room left for doubt. The truth was raw, undeniable. Finally, she broke her silence. "I never want to see him again," she said, her voice resolute. Pain filled her eyes, but so did strength. She looked at her father and her friend, realizing that, despite her suffering, they had stood by her all along. "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I didn't want to listen," she said, gripping her father's hand and holding her friend's gaze with gratitude. For the millionaire and the friend, it was a bittersweet moment. Watching her pain was difficult, but it was necessary to protect her from something far worse. They knew the battle wasn't over, but at least now she was on their side, ready to face whatever came next. With a long embrace, father and daughter sealed a renewed bond of trust, while the friend stood silently by, feeling a profound sense of relief. After the painful revelations, the millionaire's daughter needed time to process everything that had happened. In the days that followed, she avoided deep conversations, choosing instead to retreat into her own thoughts. The millionaire respected her need for space, but stayed close, ready to offer support whenever she needed it. Her friend, meanwhile, found subtle ways to help her heal, whether through light-hearted conversations or moments of quiet distraction. Slowly but surely, she began to recover, rediscovering the strength she had within herself. The ex-boyfriend, on the other hand, faced the full weight of the consequences for his actions. Armed with the collected evidence, the millionaire enlisted his legal team to ensure the young man was held criminally accountable. The rival company also became entangled in the scandal, with the implicated executive being removed after an internal investigation. It was a decisive blow to the competitor, but more importantly, it was a personal victory for the millionaire, who had successfully protected his family and his legacy. Though the emotional toll had been high, justice had prevailed. Over time, the relationship between father and daughter grew stronger. The millionaire, who had always struggled to balance the roles of protector and confidant, began opening up more to her. Their conversations moved beyond worries and concerns, encompassing stories of his own youth and the challenges he faced in building his fortune. This created a new bond between them, one rooted not only in love but also in mutual respect and admiration. Her friend, who had played a critical role in safeguarding the family, remained a steady presence in her life. The millionaire's daughter began to see something in him she had never noticed before, a quiet strength, unwavering loyalty, and a genuine care that extended far beyond friendship. Though both were cautious about exploring this new dynamic, there was a growing connection between them, built on trust and shared understanding. Weeks later, during a special dinner, the millionaire, his daughter, and her friend gathered to celebrate not just overcoming the crisis, but also the lessons they had learned in the process. This experience has reminded us of what truly matters, the millionaire said, raising his glass. Family, loyalty, and the courage to face the truth. His daughter smiled, tears glistening in her eyes, and added, and knowing that even in the darkest times, we are never alone. It was a moment of renewal, a milestone for a fresh start, forged in resilience and love. What would you have done in the millionaire's place? Do you think he made the right decisions by exposing the young man so publicly? And the daughter, how would you react upon discovering that the person you trusted most had been deceiving you all along? Would you forgive, or would you move forward without looking back? Also, what's your take on the friend's actions? Was he heroic, or should he have allowed things to resolve themselves in a different way? Share your thoughts about this ending in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story filled with lessons about trust, betrayal, and resilience, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any of our upcoming emotional stories. Before you go, check out the next video now appearing on your screen. I'm sure it will touch you deeply and help you see new possibilities. Let's continue turning stories into lessons and inspiration together. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. Until then,